to several of the Sustainable Development Goals, as you know, climate action, life below water, life on land, but a very important one that I think not many mention is partnerships for the goals. So basically, regular finance is very competitive, very ego-driven. You know, everyone wants to compete because there's scarcity of resources. And in impact investment, the name of the game is collaboration. So in order to achieve the synergies that we need to drive these goals, we need that collaboration. So imagine what a diversity of wisdom there is, you know, with the UNDP team, the BIOFIN expertise, the impact investment advisor, and the years of experience of this conservation fund in Mexico. So I guess in every one of your countries, there's of course possibilities for collaboration as well. We just saw it with Brazil. So basically that's basically the summary. We're going to be targeting first a study where we're going to be designing an investment vehicle for these projects. We're going to be looking for these projects. We're going to do a little bit of systems mapping. Anybody practice systems thinking here? So basically, systems thinking is very much used for impact investment, and it's a practice precisely to go for the best potential instead of only solving problems. So basically, the reason we're using systems thinking is we not only target the symptoms of biodiversity and the symptoms of conservation, but rather the causes. We need to get to the root causes. So if we only target the beautiful sectors of agriculture and fisheries, we're not maybe targeting the other ones that are causing the biodiversity loss, like maybe infrastructure or construction or mining, or all the others that are actually causing the loss of the biodiversity, right? So we're going to be structuring that fund in the next couple of years. And basically, I'm going to leave you at the end with our data. So if you want to follow our work, we have a Twitter. We have a very active Medium because we blog a lot about this. And there's going to be even the first impact investment conference on regeneration of ecosystems in May in San Francisco. So there are a lot of investors looking for these projects. Please remember to sell them the outcomes, not the process. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we had quite a wealth of experiences and point of views on impact investment. Originally, we thought to divide you in groups, but I'm just looking at the clock, at the timing, and we are just 15 minutes from 20 minutes from the break. So my suggestion is to open the floor for questions. I know there are a lot of also practitioners in the room, as well as interested parties. So why we just open it and let have a chance to interact with our panel. So opening for questions and contributions. Oh, David, thank you. Please.
Hello.
Good afternoon. My name is Hugo Costa. I'm from Mozambique, in this case from Wildlife Conservation Society. My question goes to Mauricio. I would just like to ask you about the forests as public-private partnerships. What is exactly the difference for concessions? I understand that the desired result is conservation outcomes, but how do you manage that? Can you explain a little bit better?
Hello?
We have different regulations for forests and for public parks. We have different regulations. For forests, there is a law with all the conditions for the private sector manage those forests. And this law, they make these investments more secure, because all the contracts between the government and the private sector, they are based on a law. For public parks, we still don't have a law. We still don't have. Most of the contracts, they are based on directive of the federal government or of the state government or of the municipalities. And this is a constraint for you make public-private partnerships for public parks. This is a current constraint. But even with this constraint, there are some examples of public-private partnerships for public parks. There is ongoing studies for you have similar conditions for a couple of studies for you have a law also for these public partnerships for parks. So I would say that there are a couple of improvements in our institutions so we can foster these public partnerships in public parks. But there is already something going on, and this in all these projects, they are profitable. So the goal of the private sector it's just to make money. But in making money, there are conditions for them. And the conditions are to protect this area, to protect the biodiversity. So in the contract, you make the private sector, you make them this, they have this obligation. So this is the way that you can have both goals. The private sector makes money, and on the other hand, we are able to protect the environment in those areas.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for an extremely concrete and practical session. You know, I'm coming from North India, where I'm advising government in Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest state of 220 million people, on various issues, including conservation. And we are trying to establish a public-private partnership culture, and we are facing problems from both ends. One is that as far as government is concerned, forest land, forest areas come under regulation, and there is a huge reluctance to bring in any player into it, which could be seen as intrusive or changing the character, pristine character of that area. As far as the private sector is concerned, they are finding it very difficult to cooperate with communities, because they see a lot of risks in this. And there is a lack of clarity in terms of business models. So they are not very sure how to go and invest big money. CSR is fine, but to invest big money into it, there is a reluctance. Now, how to change this game, whether government has to bring in some equity or create a green fund or create some kind of a financial architecture that leverages a consortium of partners, which could be IFIs and private sectors and others, and then go ahead, instead of just bilateral public-private partnerships. But attitudes are, this cultural issue is something important, because I've been trying to talk about bamboo plantation, for instance. Uttar Pradesh has the bamboo mission. And it looks like there are some corporates like IKEA and others who are interested in buying back bamboo if it is done in an organized manner. Now, I've been pushing it, but there is a reluctance to move in that direction. They may go ahead with the plantation, but there seems to be a reluctance to tie up with the private sector in a produce. I mean, I know you people must have gone through this in Latin America. How much time did it take you to change this? And what were the essential 3-4 things that helped to accelerate that change? We really need help here. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. So I guess in Mexico, for example, we have a very large company that produces bread. It's called Bimbo. Maybe you guys know it because it's globally, supposedly. So basically this company, they're interested in specific outcomes that are absolutely tied to their core business. So instead of selling them an outside project that is something that is not necessarily of their interest, we started asking them what were exactly their core concerns of environment that were a risk, a threat to their business. So basically, when they started talking, we saw so many opportunities of things that were threatening to their business and to their industry, their whole industry, that we could work on and they could have a potential for impact investment. We started talking about this in 2014. And they just started to be the anchor fund of a new impact investment fund of funds for Mexico and Latin America, basically this year. So it took 4 years, but we had to listen to them first to see what were the specific outcomes they needed for their core business, and we had to have the we. Oh, it's several of us. So basically there are groups in every country called the National Advisory Board or the Impact Investing Task Force. We have this already in 20 countries, not every country, but many countries have it. India is a super powerhouse in the National Advisory Board of India. There's actually 2 AMITs. One AMIT is the CEO, the global CEO of the Global Impact Investing Network in New York. The other AMIT is the global CEO of the task forces in UK. So basically, India is right now the head of both impact investing networks globally. So yeah, India is very much ahead in impact investment. So there's several organizations of impact investment in each country, and we collaborate, we join forces to achieve larger outcomes.
You want to add?
Okay. I think in Brazil, we have true experience about that. How to make the communities accept this type of activities. When we have infrastructure projects that have a huge impact, a huge environment impact, these projects, they have to compensate the community somehow. For instance, they have to build sewage services, they have to build houses. So some infrastructure activities in Brazil, sometimes they are very expensive because by law we have to make these compensations. So if you have these compensations in law, it's much easier to explain the community, oh, this project, you're going to take advantage of this project. So we have such policies and we have such laws that predict these compensations. For public-private partnerships for public forests, most of these projects, you don't have these problems with community, because we're talking about an area that there is nobody. There is just nature to be exploited. For public parks, some of them there are services for the public. The example that I've just shown you about Ibirapuera Park, it's a park in a city of São Paulo. And in this park, you have many services. There are restaurants, there are bars, and the private sector will make money exploiting these services. And how the community, what's the benefit from the community in this case? They'll have good services. They're going to be not only good, there will be not only good restaurants, but the private sector have the commitment to provide some public infrastructures for free. So you need to have a place for kids to play, for people walk, and so you have to predict in this case of public parks. What basically is done is try to, you have a couple of public services that are provided for free, and other services that the private sector make money. So there is a sort of subsidies between those services. So this is the way we do.
Hello, my name is Richard China from Biodiversity International. I think we all agree with the principles of what the panel has been explaining very well. And I think the representative from Brazil gave some very good examples of projects where there's a return on the capital through the concessions. But I didn't get from Mexico nor from IUCN any concrete examples of projects that offer a return on capital, because that's what we really need. We need examples to inspire us and across the range of different activities that we can follow. The principles we understand, but we need to have examples of projects which provide a return on capital that attracts investment. If we don't have those concrete examples, we just remain at the level of platitudes.
There are not too many, but there are.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's an extremely important point. I didn't want to go into details during the discussion just now, but the point we've got to in CPIC is that we have about 7 or 8 what we call blueprintable deals that are in the sectors I mentioned that are on the point of being ready for private investment. And there are others that are already have been launched on the market but are small in scale that could also be the basis for investable deals. There's one very good example of a coastal zone resilience project in the Seychelles, a bond that was launched as a result of a debt swap that was then invested in the conservation of coral reefs in order to improve the protection of coastal zone properties from storm surges and cyclones and the like. There's a range of investable deals in forms of sustainable agriculture. There's a couple of them in intensification of cattle ranching in Brazil, where the yield is from increased revenue from certified beef that is produced on land which is managed for conservation and for cattle ranching through improved grazing techniques. There are also deals underway for intensification and high quality production of cocoa in at least in West Africa, elsewhere as well, where part of the investment is going into managing forests that are around the area of production of cocoa, and the cocoa benefits from an increased consumer price because of the way in which it's produced. So the point we've got to in these kinds of initiatives is where we have projects that are not directly related to conservation, but that have ways in which you can make them have positive impacts on conservation and also improve their yield as far as an investment is concerned. What I would be very keen to try and do is to try and tie some of these things together, perhaps at a landscape scale. So if you have a green infrastructure project for water, where you're managing hilltop forests and riverside vegetation to improve the cleanliness and the regularity of the flow of water, for which that service is paid for by downstream users. There are cases where those kinds of deals are happening as well. That is connected to a deal that's investing in sustainable agriculture that is benefiting from that sustained water flow. So if you can put those two things together at a landscape scale, you're then generating yield from two different cash sources rather than just one. And the potential for scaling and increasing the attractiveness to investors is thereby increased. So there are models, and those models are being used to speed up the process by which you can get a deal from the concept stage to the investability stage. But we're not far ahead in that process yet. I think that's how I'd characterize it.
So I see you writing down, so I'm going to name a few names. One in forestry that even Max wrote about in the UNDP blog, and you can find it there. It's called Ejido Verde. So it's in the UNDP blog, so don't worry. But Ejido Verde is a forestry project in Mexico. It's in areas where the forest land was degraded by two factors. One, because government incentives to basically plant crops in an area which used to be a pine forest. And the other reason is because the drug cartels there take down the trees and plant whatever they need. So basically it was previously degraded land that is now being restored for pine forests, and the revenue stream comes from the pine resin tapping. So basically pine resin is used for everything that you can imagine, from glue and varnishes and paint and so many things. For example, all the Post-its, 3M, 3M is the company that is one of the largest buyers of pine resin in the world. So pine resin is a commodity. It's very expensive, and it has become increasingly expensive in the market. It's very well priced. The problem is that the reserves for pine resin have been wiped out. So basically Mexico is the second largest producer of pine resin, right after China. So basically they're restoring all of this previously degraded land with pine trees. The huge issue there is, of course, the time frame, because the pine tree, from when it's a baby until you can actually stop tapping the resin, it takes up to 8 years. Is there anyone here from Colombia? No. Okay. So for example, in the tropics in Colombia, in Costa Rica, those timelines become shorter. But in Mexico, it's around 8 years. So basically, you have a lot of income that will be produced in the future, but you have to finance the forestry now. So there's a lot of mechanisms that have been put in place in a sense of blended finance to be able to achieve the restoration. This year, it's going to be 1 million pine trees that will be restored in this area in Mexico. And the cash flows that are projected are tremendous, not only for the companies, but also for all the communities, the indigenous communities around that area. So that project is fascinating. It has a very beautiful video online. You can check it out. One that has restored fisheries in Mexico, it's a restoration of bivalves. ¿Cómo se dice callo de hacha? It's basically a very famous seafood in Mexico that they restored. It's a bivalve, but I don't know how to say it. But basically they spent more than 8 years in the restoration of the fishery and of the community. Sea scallop, yeah. So yeah, the restoration of the scallop community and the scallop fishery. And basically now the restoration of the ecosystem have produced 500% the yield of scallop that it was previously producing before the degradation. So it has been completely restored in ecosystem terms. And of course, now the company is called Achamar and is now exporting, and it's producing a very handsome return. A third example would be Grupo Paisano, which is smallholder farmers. It's more than 700 smallholder farmers in 4 different states in Mexico. They produce different type of crops under a collective brand. So this collective brand is now exported to Canada, Russia, Japan, so many countries with a very with a very good margin because it's now all organic, and they are transitioning all of these smallholder farmers from regular agro-industrial practices to permaculture and organic, so even beyond organic. So basically that one is one of the largest. It's on the 3rd year and it's already producing double-digit returns every year. The beauty of that project is that the accumulation of the returns is not only for the investor, but for the communities, because the communities are owners of the shares. So they get paid the dividends of the exporting company. So you have smallholder farmers that came from not having a truck to sell their food to market to owning shares of the exporting company. It's completely transformative.
Thank you. And we can say that they have estimated about 8 billion invested in conservation impact investment. So it's all relative, right? It's if you measure it with standard financing flows of trillions, etc. But there is a building portfolio which remains small and need to be scaled. But it's not that there are not examples that can show that it can work. And another important element is that still forms of blended finance are quite important in establishing these collaborative networks, in investing in some of the technology and practices, and creating a kind of a space for the market to grow. We have a last, I've noticed 2 questions from this side of the room. This will be the last round, so we'll take a few more questions, and then we ask the panelists to respond and provide concluding remarks.
Hello, my name is Fernando. I'm the National Coordinator for BIOFIN in Ecuador. I have a question for Mauricio. So how do you evaluate the performance or the effectiveness of the concessions? Do you evaluate them based on the increasing or the maintenance of the biodiversity of the area that is under concession? Or do you make the evaluation based on the economic profit coming from that area? Because we know that those 2 indicators may be difficult to put together in order to make a good evaluation.
Yeah, we moved.
I've got mine.
In interest of time.
Afternoon, thank you. Very interesting examples. I just want to know how you have been able to structure, in particular, the manner in which you assess these projects. Do you have a criteria that you use, and also whether or not in your structuring of the blending, whether you have looked at other SDGs, for example, when you talk about smallholder agric, in particular the example of organic farming. It would have a lot of linkages to poverty. It would have SDG 1, the SDG on maternal and women, a lot of these are women. Whether you're also trying to track to see how some of these impacts would also, what kind of impacts they would have on other SDGs that are not necessarily considered biodiversity SDGs. Thank you.
Hi, this is Andrew Mitchell. I'm an advisor to Althelia Mirova, which has a very large portfolio of projects ongoing, impact investment projects. So have a look there if you want some examples. I wanted to ask you whether you had any examples from the social impact investing world on how they de-risk investments, because when you're dealing with landscapes and conservation, one of the barriers that we constantly come up against is how to de-risk the investment to where you can get lending going out for 10 or 12 or 15 years as opposed to 3 or 4. Often they're very short, high interest rates. In Peru, it could be as high as 26%. So how do you cut that in half and treble the length of the investment tenor? And I wondered if there were any examples of that from the social impact investing. We get people like USAID who come in and help de-risk it, but I just wondered if there are any examples from that sphere. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mariana Bellot from BIOFIN Coordinator in Mexico. James, Frank, I want to ask you, in your opinion, and thinking of the examples that Laura mentioned, and we discussed this earlier during our time at the airport, how much of, so we have NGOs in my country and in most countries have for years supported conservation projects or sustainable use projects for years. We have thousands of small projects that hopefully, or we are expecting them to be able to scale up at some point to become projects that can actually provide economic returns. But most of them were not born with this mind. I mean, they were born to depend on donations and philanthropic money, and they were so. In your opinion, is there a chance to work with these projects so they can actually change their nature and move forward, or those projects that have the most success are the ones that are born with this in mind?
Thank you. And,
do we have any checks and measures to ensure that the investors do not go beyond the work or the area allocated to them? And also, does this investment attract the produce? Does it attract investment tax? If yes, how does it compare with the other taxes?
yes, I think it's very interesting questions, and some are quite complex. I hope our panelists can try to address them in a short time frame. But this is also to say that we have also an opportunity to discuss at the coffee breaks and other opportunities, including through the open sessions and the marketplace. So if you are not satisfied by the time that we could offer on this topic, we have through the conference other venues to do that. So, but I will not steal any more time. I think we have a number of questions. The first question was on the partnership, and then Frank and Laura can address the other question and any concluding remark you may want.
Okay, so just to clear up about our program on concessions for public forests and public parks. So obviously the goal is not only make profit about natural resources. The point is that possible to have to protect natural resources, to protect biodiversity, and has profit either? So we're talking about two goals. It's not one against the other, and I think when Frank made his speech, when Laura either, I think both of them highlight this circumstance, because the concept of impact investment is it's possible to have these two objectives. You can have protect the environment and make profit with this. Big profit with this. So that's what we try to do in Brazil with these programs, or in these programs for concession of public parks and public forests. These programs, they are new. You haven't been doing this for so much time. So their evaluations are ongoing, but I think they are pretty much close to the experience that we see in Mexico and other countries. And those experiences, what they show is when you think about conservation areas, when you think about biodiversity, maybe it's possible to do all of this and have economic activities and have profit. And if you do this, it's much easier to achieve the environmental goals. So.
Laura, you might want to answer the question on impact measurement and the question on learning from other impact investment sectors.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I think it was so many questions. I want to make sure I address everything. But basically, impact measurement. You asked about impact measurement, right? So yes, there's several impact measurements that are globally accepted. We have global standards for impact measurement, and these measurements are improved every 2 years, more or less. So we're still, it's a process, right? We still know that there's so much improvement about impact. So there's one evolution that is very important this year in impact investment. We've been doing impact investment formally for 10 years in the world. So in this evolution, we have evolved from regular impact metrics to actual impact management. So there's a very good website. It's called the impactmanagementproject.com. This is a project by 700 entities in the whole world around how to manage impact, how to make it practical so that everyone can measure their own organization's impact, or the big organization, the big picture, or the project's impact. So basically this website was created in collaboration of 700 people. It was, small companies like ours, like SBX, and big companies like UBS. So you can see that those standards are applicable to all impact investors. So that would be very helpful. The other one is Sistema B, or B Corporation, that you mentioned as well. In Brazil, it is very famous. B Corporation is a community that wants to have the best companies for the world instead of the best companies of the world. So basically, it's a commitment for interdependence between natural capital, social capital, and economic capital of each company. And I think that one answers the last question over there, I think was about taxes. Was it about taxes? Yeah. So B Corporation even has this new branch, of, let's say, public advising, so that there's tax incentives for big corporations. In more than 21 states of the 50 states of the United States, they already have that tax incentive for big corporations, and in several parts of Latin America and other places as well. It's almost 20 countries now that have a special tax incentive for big corporations. In Mexico, we're still working on it because we have presidential elections this year, so it's going to be tough. Anyway, so about the SDGs, there is an impact investment framework with the SDGs. I believe they are all connected, but that's just me, I believe all oppression is connected, the gender one, the injustice in general, the inequality, I think it's all connected. So basically the SDGs have this framework on impact investment, and you can go and check it out. And around blended finance and other mechanisms that help with the social and the environmental, I think that was your question, right? So de-risking, right? So for us, it is very strange that we still divide the social from the environmental. For me, I still don't understand it. Why people ask me the social separately from the environmental. I am a person and I depend on water to survive, so I am part of nature, and it is very intrinsically tied. So we usually don't have that separation of these are the social projects, these are the environmental. They are usually affecting both things at the time. So for example, the way we de-risk with specific structures is precisely the one I was talking about, transformative finance. So instead of using the regular finance instruments that are designed to be accumulative, like debt, so debt is the most well-known finance mechanism, but the problem with debt is that the outcome of debt is accumulation of wealth in one side and the accumulation of debt in the other. So we rather design new mechanisms that are distributive by design. So basically that is the most important social part of the financial structure. If you use structures that are distributive by design instead of accumulative by design, you change the outcome for the social communities involved, and you achieve the environmental outcomes as well. So basically, yeah, final quote is a Buckminster Fuller quote. Remember that we are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims. Thank you.
Thank you. And Frank, some final remarks to, I think the question of Mariana was also quite important, and any final remarks to close this panel?
Thank you very much. Yes, I I'm a relative newcomer to the world of finance, and I've been looking at the way in which finance people think with great astonishment for the last couple of years. I think you're an excellent example of the kind of thinking that is totally unfamiliar to conservation people. And one of the manifestations of the awe that I have for the way that finance people's brains work is how they can come up with creative solutions to problems that we thought were completely insoluble. And I think the fact that we are living in a world where the contribution of natural systems to the ability of humanity to survive on the planet is only going to increase will mean that if we don't find a way to invest in nature and generate a return from it by co-opting our economic processes to do so, then we're all going to die a horrible death. Therefore, clever people will figure out a solution in terms of the financial structuring that is required in order to generate that investment to go into conservation outcomes. I think the point we're at the moment is that, as you say, there's a distance between where the conservation world is and where the finance world is, but that distance is being closed quite quickly in some cases by the fact of being able to put on these cash flow goggles and see in a project where you can identify flows of money that are coming, and they can be quite unexpected. You just have to look at them from the perspective of a finance person to do so. One of the areas that I'm absolutely convinced is going to be very large in the future is the ability of natural systems to generate benefits for insurance because of the stability of natural systems preventing damage to things of value that are insured by insurance companies. If you can show that that's what natural systems are doing, then your ability to generate a cash flow for an insurance company is enormous. And that gives you the opportunity to go in and make the investment in the natural system in a mechanism that really nobody would have thought of doing so before. So I think there are ways like that that we will be very creative about in the next few years that will combine the ingenuity of the conservation world with the ingenuity of the finance world, and we'll come up with some extremely exciting solutions.
Thanks a lot, and let's have an applause to our fantastic panel. Particular thanks to Frank, who almost didn't sleep, but still volunteered to come to this panel. And thank to you all for staying a bit more. I'm sure you have more questions, but please don't hesitate to ask to us, to the panel. There is actually a lot and growing information that has been produced, and most of it is available online. So please don't hesitate to ask and interact, and we will discuss further in the conference. Thank you. And the coffee break is just next to you.